So in the last few videos, we covered chapters 1 through 5 of the Gita. That means we should be on chapter 6 now. But before moving to chapter 6, I've been reflecting on a particular verse for the past few days. And so I thought I'd make a standalone video on it just to record my thoughts. And so this short video has nothing to do with the Bhagavad Gita series, in that it's not part of a chronological analysis or summary of the text. It's just one verse from chapter 7, which I found fascinating, that I'll talk about briefly today. And at some point in the near future, we'll pick up with chapter 6. And so if you'd like, you can just watch the series and skip this video, or if you're coming across this video on its own, it might be something interesting. So, the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are on Karma Yoga. The second set of 6 chapters are on Bhakti Yoga, and the third set of 6 chapters are on Jnana Yoga. Karma Yoga is the yoga of action, first 6 chapters. Second set of 6 chapters, the yoga of devotion or devotional service, loving service to God, Bhakti. And the third set of 6 chapters, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, which isn't really a good rendering or translation of the term, but it'll do for now. In the first set of 6 chapters, Krishna describes the nature of the self, which is called Sankhya Yoga, the nature of the self or the nature of the Atma, and Karma Yoga, the nature of action done selflessly as a devotion or service to God. The 7th chapter is significant in that it marks the transition from Krishna describing primarily the nature of the self and the nature of action to now describing who he is and what our relationship with him is. And so thus the Gita turns or transforms from a work of philosophy into a work of theology. Now, the reason I want to cover this particular shloka or verse is because there are many verses that your average Hindu or Indian might be familiar with from the Gita, right? Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, that's chapter 4, right? Sarva dharman parityaje mamekam sharanam vraja, in chapter 18. Dhyayato vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate, chapter 2. Karman evadikaraste mafaleshu kadachana. So many Hindus, almost every Hindu hopefully knows that in India. This is a verse which an ordinary person, including myself, probably does not pay any attention to. But it has so much depth, so much bhakti ras, or divine energy and meaning within it, that I thought it makes sense to cover. So in verse 7.1, which the chapter is called Jnana Vigyan Yoga, Krishna says, mayy āsakta-manāḥ pārtha yogaṁ yuñjan mad-āśrayaḥ asaṁśayaṁ samagraṁ yathā jñāsyasi chṛṇu. The Lord of Shri said, Shri, by the way, is the name of Lakshmi, who is the wife of Vishnu. So Krishna said, listen, O Pārtha, which is a name for Arjun, how with mind attached to me, practicing yoga and taking refuge in me, you can know me completely without doubt. And so the reason I want to cover this verse is because it has a couple of important elements that every single person would miss. The first one, Krishna says that by practicing yogaṁ yuñjan, what do you get? Right? There's a practice, a vaidhi in Sanskrit, and abhidya. There's a practice. What is the outcome, right? There's a cause and there's an effect. There's an input and an output. So Krishna is saying the input is yogaṁ yuñjan, the practice of yoga, okay? Which is a little complex to understand because we know that there are many different types of yoga, okay? Through the practice of yoga, one attains mayy āsakta-manāḥ. Mayy is the first person, which means me. Krishna says, by practicing yoga, your mind becomes attached to me. That's fascinating. The input is practicing yoga, and the output is that you develop attachment to Krishna. As opposed to what? As opposed to the material world. You develop attachment to Krishna and not to material objects. Remember in the second chapter, in verses 259 and 261, Krishna says that it's very difficult to fast from the senses, to give up our attachment to material things. In order to do so, we need to experience a higher taste, right? In order to practice religion, to practice bhakti, which by the way is superior to any mundane concept of religion, to practice bhakti or love to God, you have to first be able to give up your attachment to material things. So Krishna says, by practicing yoga, you develop attachment for him. Okay? And with this attachment, you know him completely, samagraṁ, without a doubt. And Krishna is saying, listen to this, Arjun. Listen. Listen, O Arjun. So I just pointed out 4 things, 4 elements of this verse. Okay? And I'm going to break them down. We'll start with the word listen. Why does Krishna use the word listen? Chrnu. Well, the Vedas are called shruti because they were revealed to the great sages. And that one Veda was compiled or split into 4 by Vedvyas. Okay? So, knowledge in this Vedic tradition is received orally. Think about it. How does a child learn a language? To learn anything, you have to be able to hear. So if you were to ask someone in medicine, would you rather have a child born deaf or blind? Well, most people would say, well, I'd prefer to have a child born deaf, right? You can learn sign language. Being blind that's very, very difficult to navigate the world with blindness. But medically speaking, it would be easier for a child to be born deaf and to develop normally, because all of our learning primarily happens to the ears. Children who are born blind are more prone to having, cognitive challenges with learning, disabilities in that sense, right? So the first step of learning in anything, whether it's language, science, math, anything, is to listen. Listen to an instructor, listen to a teacher. The first step of bhakti, of devotion, is chrnu, sravanam, listening, right? It's not having faith. It's not practicing anything in particular, right? Faith, practice, love, all of those elements are products of listening. The first thing you have to do to learn anything is listen. Listening convinces you that something is proper. It puts you on a path where you can practice something. And we know this because in the Bhagavatam, the most significant text in Hinduism, there are 9 stages of bhakti that are described. The first one is sravanam. To hear, chrnu, comes from the same word, sravanam. Shravanam kirtanam vishnu, smaranam padasevanam, archanam vandanam dasyam sakyam atma nivedanam. These are the 9 stages, right? Hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, paraphernalia, and pastimes of the Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, etc. You can read the whole thing. The very first step is hearing, shravanam. So in this first verse of chapter 7, which marks a transition from karma yoga to bhakti yoga, Krishna says the first step, O Arjuna, is listen to me. That is the first thing that is significant in this verse, which no other person will pick up on unless you've done this depth of analysis. Okay? Second piece of analysis. How do you do it? Yogaṁ, yuñjan. There are 2 types of paths in bhakti, or devotional love to God, right? Why do we call it love for God? Because that is the aim. In order to practice bhakti, there are certain practices that you have to do. You have to practice yoga, right? And what does that mean? You do kirtan, right? You sing Krishna's holy names and pastimes. You hear pastimes about him. You think about him. You do nam jap, right? You take the name of the Lord, of Krishna. And so yogaṁ yuñjan then refers to the practice of bhakti with certain rules and regulations. The practice of yoga over time enables one to become attached to Krishna with their mind. Yogaṁ yuñjan, the input, gives the output of mayy āsakta-manāḥ. Okay? That's the significance. So I said there's 4 points. Those are the first 3. Chrnu, yogaṁ yuñjan, mayy āsakta-manāḥ, and finally, samagraṁ. Krishna is God with form, Bhagavan, right? If you remember this introductory video, we compared God with form to the actual sun orb, and God without form to the photons that are massless emitting or emanating from the sun. So God is originally personal and yet also impersonal. Sakad nirakad. He is transcendentally corporeal, meaning he has a form, right? Corp. Like a corpse. And he's also formless, like the photons. And so Krishna's complete form, meaning his original form, with a personality, Krishna with 2 hands, blue skin, flute in hand, can be known completely through this practice. Whereas other practices are ultimately incomplete realizations of Krishna. Okay? So now, let's dive into this a little deeper before we end this video. Krishna says that the first step in bhakti, in self-realization, in yoga, in any practice, is chrṇu, sravanam, listening. Listening is the process through which all knowledge is received. That's why the Vedas are cosmic revelations, represented by the syllable Om, and passed down orally. The oral tradition is very significant because knowledge is received through sound. Point number 2. Krishna can be known through yoga yuñjan, through the practice of yoga, through the practice of bhakti with rules and regulations. Okay, now another term for this, and you should write this down, is sadhana or vaidhi bhakti. Sadhana means practice. So Krishna is saying through sadhana or vaidhi, sadhana bhakti, vaidhi bhakti, which are terms used by Rupa Goswami, one attains mayy āsakta-manāḥ. And what is this yogaṁ yuñjan, right? Because we know that yoga is a generic term. It can refer to Sankhya yoga, to karma yoga, to bhakti yoga. We're saying in this particular verse that bhakti yoga, roughly, for our purposes in this video, even though it's more complex than this, has 2 paths. The path of practice with rules and regulations, and the path of pure love. Okay? And so what's being described here? Yogaṁ yuñjan describes the practice of rules and regulations. And mayy āsakta-manāḥ means developing attachment to Krishna, which means the path of love. So in order to develop or evolve into the highest stage of bhakti, which is spontaneous love and devotion for Krishna, or āsakti, okay, or raganuga bhakti, one first has to do sadhana or vaidhi bhakti. Okay? That is the significance of this verse that every single person reading this misses. Okay? There's multiple types of yoga. Karma yoga, yoga of selfless action. Jnān yoga, state of meditative reflection and monasticism. Third practice, bhakti yoga. Krishna is saying in the first 6 chapters, we've already talked about the nature of the self, Sankhya yoga, and the nature of action, karma yoga. Now let's talk about the nature of God. If you want to know God completely, samagraṁ, you can do it through bhakti. Bhakti has 2 stages sequentially. The first stage is practicing bhakti with rules and regulations. And the second stage is pure bhakti or spontaneous love. The first stage of practice is called sadhana bhakti, and the second stage is called raganuga bhakti. And this is what these 2 phrases refer to. Yogaṁ yuñjan refers to sadhana or vaidhi bhakti, and mayy āsakta-manāḥ refers to raganuga bhakti or asakti, or pure spontaneous love and devotion for Krishna, right? And Rupa Goswami describes it, right? The first stage of bhakti, a different system, because we describe the stages of as sravanam, kirtanam, Vishnu, right? The ways of learning about and participating in bhakti, first you listen, right? You first hear. This is a different scheme or schematic, right? Which sort of culminates in pure love for Krishna. So there's stages. The first one is you have to have faith in God. And as you have faith in God, then you associate with saintly people, then you practice devotion, you stop bad habits, you become steady, you develop a taste for love, you become attached, you develop spiritual emotion, then you attain pure love for Krishna, right? So Krishna's saying in verses 7:1 that by practicing sadhana bhakti, rules and regulations, let's roughly call that the first 4 steps here, one attains the last 4. That's the significance. Okay, and what is yogaṁ yuñjan? This sort of early step of bhakti, which centers on certain practices. Simple, kirtan, bhajan, nam jap, right? So chanting a mala with Krishna's name, right? Nam sankirtanam yasya sarva papa pranashanam. That's what the Bhagavatam's very last verse says. That in this yug, in this day and age, the most sublime and pure method for attaining God is chanting his holy names. Okay, whether it's Krishna, Ram, Vishnu, Narayan, any of those names of Vishnu, right? And through that, when done with as a practice with steadiness, practice with certain rules and regulations. And what I mean by rules and regulations, not to get very terse, is that you sit in a meditative stance. You try to chant Krishna's names quietly without being disturbed. You control what you eat. You control what you speak. Those are all part of bhakti, right? Bhakti isn't just bhajan and kirtan. It's certain rules, certain practices that you adopt in your life, right? You eat in moderation. You sleep in moderation. You don't use bad language. You read about Krishna. You read the Gita. Yogaṁ, yuñjan. Reading the Gita is part of yogaṁ, yuñjan. Reading the Gita, saying Krishna's name, hearing spiritual discourses, watching this video, all of these practices fall under yogaṁ, yuñjan, right? Because they're prescribed, they're formulaic, and they culminate in mayy, āsakta-manāḥ. You develop attachment for Krishna. So by practicing bhakti with certain rules and regulations, you attain a state of spontaneous love. Your mind becomes attached to Krishna. You don't have to follow any rules anymore. Right now, you don't have to sit down and chant, even though you will. You don't have to, because your mind will always think of Krishna. The example I like to give is, imagine you're learning basketball for the first time. There's the theory and there's the practice. The theory is, well, basketball has 5 positions. Okay? There are certain moves. There are certain techniques used to dribble a ball. There are certain schemes you can develop to pass the ball, to make a layup, to cross someone up. But if you're LeBron James, if you're one of the best basketball players in the history of the sport, you think LeBron is saying, well, yeah, he's a center, he's a power forward, he's a two-guard. No, LeBron knows what the game is. He doesn't have to theoretically think about the game of basketball. He spontaneously plays. He's hardwired the game of basketball into his veins, right? He doesn't have to consciously think. His hands move before he even processes it. Similarly, when you've practiced bhakti enough, by taking Krishna's name, listening to spiritual discourses, and doing bhajan and kirtan, you develop attachment to Krishna, and through that attachment, you're always thinking of him, and you can see him, and you can experience the divine in your daily life, right? So that's the significance here. And why is this important? Because you can know Krishna completely. People who've practiced Karam Yoga, or Gyan Yoga, or any other type of yoga, any other practice, they are aiming towards perfection. And in fact, they might even attain perfection in a yogic sense, right? They might transcend all dualities. They might be free from happiness and distress. They might not have any material attachments. They might transcend all those things, but they don't know God completely. They might have self-realization. They don't have God realization. So Krishna is saying, listen, because listening is the first step in learning, whether it's bhakti or any material science or art. By listening to me, you will be convinced that you should practice yoga or sadhana bhakti through kirtan, bhajan, nam jap, meditative practices that help you focus while you take Krishna's name. As you do that, your mind will become attached to me. Your sadhana or vaidhi bhakti will become raganuga bhakti, spontaneous loving devotion, unbound by any particular rules or regulations, like LeBron, who isn't thinking about the theory of basketball and all the positions and all the moves. He just plays the game. The ball rolls off his fingers. Similarly, Krishna's name will roll off your tongue, and his presence will be permeated in your mind. And once you have a attachment to Krishna, you know him fully. You know him more than others treading other paths of yoga, right? And how do we know this? Before we get to that, let's just read a brief part of the commentary here. How does one reach this plane? One begins by hearing, indicated here by the words chrnu. It all starts with sravanam. Krishna says further, yogaṁ, yuñjan. One attains comprehensive knowledge and comprehensive knowing in love through yoga practice. Why? Because devotional yoga has 3 developmental stages. Devotion in practice, sadhana bhakti, that's the rules and regulations I talked about, as well as devotion in ecstasy and devotion in love. Bhav bhakti and prem bhakti. For our purposes, we sort of collapsed these into one and just said if your mind is attached to Krishna, mayy āsakta-manāḥ, we're calling that bhav or prem. For our purposes, this is a little too terse because the differences between bhav and prem bhakti are not relevant here. Bhakti, for our purposes, is 2 stages: devotion in practice, and then devotion in love. Right? Sadhana bhakti and raganuga bhakti, prem bhakti, shuddh bhakti. Here Krishna speaks of devotion and practice. He is speaking, however, of the final stage of sadhana bhakti, invoking as he has the word asakti, spiritual attachment. Asakti is a stage of practice in which the practitioner's mind is attached to Krishna, the object of devotion. At this stage, due to intense attachments, one's spiritual identity is glimpsed as one enters devotion and ecstasy, taking refuge in Krishna alone. Okay? Without holding anything back, Krishna says, I shall expound on this knowledge and its realization, understanding which there remains nothing further to be known in this world. Krishna says, if you follow this practice, you will know me completely. Samagraṁ. And there will be nothing to be known further in this world. And why will you know Krishna completely? And how is someone who practices this bhakti different from someone who practices another yoga path? And I'm bringing that up because in chapter 6, Krishna said in the very last verse, one who practices bhakti, yoginam api sarvesham madkatin antaratmana shraddhavan bhajte yogaṁ samyuktatamomata. Krishna says that person is the highest. Why? Because now Krishna says in verse 7:3, among many thousands of men, one may strive for perfection, and among those who attain perfection, only a very rare soul knows me in truth. This is so significant, and we're not going to get into this because this video is only about 7:1. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because Krishna says you'll know him completely. You might ask, well, anyone who practices yoga, whether it's karma yoga, jnana yoga, or bhakti yoga, they've transcended dualities, they've transcended material attachments. Don't they all achieve the same state? Because Krishna tells us over and over again. For example, in chapter 5. Krishna says, Karma yoga and jnana yoga are the same. Arjuna asked him which one are superior. Krishna said both lead to happiness. Even though karma yoga is superior, both lead to the same destination and are thus one. Ekam sankhyaṁ cha yogaṁ cha. Krishna here is now saying something different. He's saying those people who practice karma yoga, who practice jnana yoga, they might strive to attain perfection, and they might even attain perfection. This is crazy. They're perfect. They've transcended all material desires. They're mukt. They have attained moksha in this life. But they don't know Krishna completely because they don't know him in truth. Although in one sense, everyone pursues perfection on some level, very few people are interested in striving for spiritual perfection systematically in accordance with the sacred literature and advice of saints. In this verse, Krishna makes a startling point. Even among liberated souls, very few know him in truth. According to Sridhar Swami, the spirit of this verse is that even among thousands of those who are perfect through knowledge in the self, only one perchance, through my grace, knows me in truth as the Supreme Self. Krishna, the giver of mukti or liberation, stands above liberation. And if he should grace the liberated, their perfection knows perfection. So even among perfected beings, there is a more perfect being. Anyone who's practicing yoga, who's transcended their material desires, who's free from dualities, who performs actions selflessly, they will be mukt. They will not have to take another birth, and they will attain liberation. Krishna is saying, even among such perfect people, one who worships me is the perfect among the perfect. They are the rarest of the rare. They're practicing the highest form of yoga. And so that takes me again, as a conclusion, back to verse 7:1. Mayy āsakta-manāḥ pārtha yogaṁ yuñjan mad-āśrayaḥ asaṁśayaṁ samagraṁ mam yathā jñāsyasi chrṇu. Krishna says, through hearing about me, sravanam, which is the first step of bhakti and any type of learning, you will be convinced that you should practice yoga. Or you will practice yoga with rules and regulations. This is sadhana or vaidhi bhakti. Nam jap and kirtan. Taking Krishna's name in a meditative position, sitting down and just chanting his name, and then doing kirtan, singing his glories in a group setting or personally with instruments at home. If you do this, you'll become attached to Krishna. Mayy āsakta-manāḥ. You'll develop raganuga bhakti, pure spontaneous love and devotion for Krishna, unbound by any rules or regulations. A perfect being doesn't have to follow any rules. LeBron doesn't have to think about the theory of basketball to play basketball. An artist who as a child learned to paint from a teacher, who had to slowly practice their strokes over and over again. Once they're an artist, once they're Leonardo da Vinci, they don't have to practice, they don't have to follow any rules, they're perfect. Similarly, someone who listens to Krishna's teachings and practices chanting his holy name, they develop spontaneous love and devotion for him, where now they don't have to do any of those practices, but they still do them because they love Krishna, and chanting mala allows them to connect with Krishna and experience him even though they don't need to have such a mechanical process of counting Krishna's name on beads. And the result of having your mind attached to Krishna, well, of course, you're freed from attachment to material things, but you become the perfect among the perfect because you know Krishna completely. That is the significance of this verse that everyone misses when they read it. Hear about Krishna, sravanam, practice yoga, yuñjan, which means sadhana bhakti, which is nam jap and kirtan. Through that, you become mayy āsakta-manāḥ, attached to Krishna in your mind, which is a stage of prem bhakti or raganuga bhakti. And through that, you get to know Krishna completely, samagraṁ, which means you transcend all other yogis, which is why Krishna says in chapter 647, of all yogis, he who abides in me with full faith, worshipping me in devotion, is most intimately united with me and considered the best of all. Krishna is saying a bhakti yogi is the best of all because he knows me completely. He knows me completely. He has nothing else to be known in this entire world. Among those who strive for perfection, who practice other paths, he is the highest because he is the very rare soul who knows me in truth. So this is the meaning of verse 7:1. It's so deep, and everyone misses it because it's not a fancy verse that flows so beautifully. But in it, it has the seeds of bhakti. This verse has the seeds of bhakti in it, in a way that other verses may have explicitly. This has them, but you have to dig deeper. Remember this. Mayy āsakta-manāḥ pārtha yogaṁ yuñjan mad-āśrayaḥ asaṁśayaṁ samagraṁ yathā jñāsyasi chṛṇu. Thank you.